Throughout its history, Runeterra suffered a lot of damage. Sometimes people fought and ruined the nations around them, and sometimes there was a civil war and the nation ruined itself. But regardless of what battles were fought, more and more pieces of Runeterra were chipped away. The interesting thing is that most of the damage was caused by a single man. And it wasn't Mordekaiser who conquered Valoran, or Borem Darkwill who swarmed Ionia with chemical weapons. It was Azir. And funnily enough, it's not really what he did while he was alive. It's the fact that he died and everything went downhill after that. So in today's video, I want to theorize. I want to have a look at what would happen if Azir never died. First, we need to find a way for Azir to survive. So let's start from the beginning. As those of you who watched our complete story of Runeterra know, the Sun Disk of Shurima was likely an experiment ran by the Celestials. The Void was slowly turning into a threat, and the Celestials wanted to create an army of soldiers that could fight it back. So they helped Shurimans build a Sun Disk to create the Shuriman Ascended. Let's say all of this stayed the same. Time passed and Azir was born into the new Shuriman Empire that was now taking over the continent. Now, as a child, Azir became friends with one of his slaves. That slave was Xerath. And as they grew up, Azir kept Xerath by his side as his advisor. Now the reason why Azir died was because he was still an emperor with thousands of starving slaves. While the common citizens of Shurima loved Azir dearly, the slaves hated him, and Xerath was one of these slaves. However, the unfortunate thing is that Azir had a plan to free all the slaves after his ascension. Xerath didn't know about this because Azir wanted to keep it a secret. So because nobody knew about Azir's secret plan, everyone still hated him. And Xerath ended up killing him in the end. Now enough introductions, let's finally start with the theory. So let's say Azir did tell Xerath about his plan to free slaves from their chains. And as a result, Xerath supported Azir's claim to the throne of Shurima. Which means that the capital city of Shurima never blew up, Azir turned into an Ascended, Renekton never fell into madness, and Nasus never became depressed.
Oof.
However, this wouldn't affect the events surrounding the nation. The battle for Igathia would still happen. Setaka, the legendary warrior queen of the Ascended host, still died, and the massive void rift was still opened in the kingdom of Igathia. However, because Azir is alive, he can lead the Ascended. This means that the now void-touched Ascended never embraced the madness, and they never turned into the Darkin. The Ascended host remained uncorrupted, and Rast, Aatrox and Varus stayed as warriors of light. Now, without the Darkin war would never happen. And if the Darkin didn't ravage Runeterra, this means that the Shuriman experiment was a success. So suddenly the Celestials would support Azir as the true ruler of humanity, and they would try to create even more Ascended. Because the Shuriman Empire would be under control, not only could they work on fully sealing the rift in Igathia, but the Shuriman Empire could also conquer Valoran under the command of Nasus, with Renekton on the front lines. This means that as the Empire spread around, they also constructed more Sun Disks all over Runeterra. Interestingly enough, since the Darkin never happened, Runeterra was never ravaged by them, which means that the Rune Wars also never happened. But the world runes would still likely get discovered, and they would be brought back to Azir so he could present them to the Celestials. None of this would affect the Petricite Forest, however, and as the Shuriman Empire would consume the rest of Valoran, eventually they would reach this forsaken area that drained their magic, which means that the Petricite Forest would become a base of operation for people who opposed Azir's rule. Because let's be honest, all dictatorships end badly. This means that Azir would finally see some resistance from the rest of the world. But the Petricite Forest wouldn't be the only place to do that. If the Rune Wars never happened, Ryze's home never blew up, which means that the map would actually look different. There would be a piece of land right here. But more importantly, under the rule of the Shuriman Empire, smaller kingdoms would never be able to grow, so the ruined king would never become a king. Or ruined, in fact. The Blessed Isles would stay hidden from Azir's rule, with their new leader, Master Tyrus. But besides the Blessed Isles and the Petricite Forest, there was also Ionia. Now, in order to conquer Ionia, Azir would have to cross the ocean and fight against the wild magics of the Ionian spirit. So in order to succeed at such a difficult task, the Celestials would lend him the power of the previously gathered world runes, elevating his state of ascension. Just like that, he would become the first rune-empowered Ascended. Now, with Ionia conquered, Petricite Forest under siege, and Freljord sitting right around the corner, Shurima would have time to develop better weapons for their arsenal. Of course, since the Rune Wars never happened, the Breaker never woke up, They never protected their kind. And Azir would discover hex crystals thousands of years earlier. This would lead into the research of the hextech technology in the heart of the Shuriman Empire. Meanwhile, the Blessed Isles would start laying out plans how to stop Azir from consuming Runeterra. They learned about the rebellion in the west, and they learned that Lord Mordekaiser became the overlord of the Petricide Forest, and he constructed the Petricide Bastion, an impenetrable fortress, untouchable by Shuriman magic. See, at first, Azir wouldn't be able to breach the walls of the Petricide Bastion, but that would all change the moment they would be done with their hextech research, because it would elevate Azir's state of ascension.
We have no beginning, we have no end, we are infinite.
Just like that, he would become the first rune-empowered Cyber Ascended. Now with this new Cyber army, the Shuriman Empire would be able to breach the walls of the Petricide Bastion, since they wouldn't be really using magic. However, the Holy Lord Mordekaiser wouldn't make it easy for them. By slaying thousands of Cyber Shurimans on his own, Mordekaiser would be able to hold the Bastion. At this point, the only allies the Blessed Isles had were under siege, so Master Tyrus had to act. At first they weren't sure how to help Mordekaiser, who was on the other side of the world. But after weeks of research, the scientists found out that Runeterra is not flat, and so they can sail around. So now, with the two nations allied against the tyrant of Shurima, there was a massive war in the Petricide Forest. Now, since all of these things happened in about 80 years, Xerath was getting pretty old. And since he was by Azir's side this entire time, he proved himself worthy of ascension. He was given a worthy ascended form. Since Azir conquered 80% of the known world, and since he created an army beyond what they imagined, the Celestials were happy about the Shuriman experiment, and they let Azir do whatever he wants. Unfortunately, over time, the war for Petricide Bastion would end, Mordekaiser would fall, and Azir would get the final piece of Valoran. At this point, Azir would push into Freljord, but Freljord has the wildest of all lands, and Azir would be met with the greatest resistance in the form of the Volibear. The Volibear is the force of the primal bear god, a god that would unite the last remnants of humanity the frozen barbarians can offer. And just like that, Azir's army would be decimated by nightmarish abominations the world had never seen. Suddenly, the army of Shurima would start retreating from the north, and as they would do that, they would be attacked from the west as well. Mordekaiser was dead, and Tyrus took his corpse back to the Blessed Isles, so the Petricide Bastion was gone. However, when Azir attacked the Petricide Forest the first time, he unknowingly let the trees absorb his rune-empowered magic. And just like that, the trees became ascended. And it was those rising Petricide trees that attacked Azir's army, forcing it all the way back to Shurima. Now, without Azir's leadership in Ionia, the spirit of Ionia would take back the First Lands. Back in the Blessed Isles, Tyrus would try to resurrect Mordekaiser. But Mordekaiser's body was far too holy to be touched by simple magic. So out of grief, Tyrus cast a spell that would bind their souls together forever. But he miscalculated the spell and it misfired, consuming the Blessed Isles with black mist, turning it into the Shadow Isles. Now all of a sudden, Rammus emerged from the sands to tell Azir the truth, that everything he did for the glory of the Empire was a lie. And that's when Xerath betrays him. Unable to control his ascended form, Xerath decided to end it all. They were toying with powers worthy of gods, not of men. And as men they shall die. With that, Azir's death would cause a chain of explosions from all the sun disks around Runeterra, causing a hole in the world in this exact spot. All the world runes would be scattered around, and this great cataclysm would ravage the lands for millennia to come. Now, since the Celestials were stroking their egos, they didn't really bother with sealing the rift in Ikathia. So with Azir dead, the Ascended would fall into madness, creating blood magic and turning into the Darkin. In the west, the Petricide trees would become dormant, and they would host a new nation. In the east, a different empire would be built by Mordekaiser Jr., the son of the Holy Overlord. Ionia would stay in harmony, the army of Shurima would be nothing but dust, the Bracern would bury themselves to hide from the cataclysm, and Bilgewater is there too, I guess. And that's what would happen if Azir never died. Hey, did you know that we have social media and Twitch where we talk about other League facts and stories? And did you know that we have need mugs and shirts too? The links to all of that will be below. And as always, thank you, come again.
There is a realm of existence so far beyond your own, you cannot even imagine it. I am beyond your comprehension. Organic life is nothing but a genetic mutation, an accident. My kind transcends your very understanding.